And here's the uncomfortable truth. All signs point to failure. The average North American house lasts 80 to 100 years, a blink in architectural time. What we lost wasn't just stone and timber. We lost methods that created resilience. We replaced them with systems that fail if one tiny thing goes wrong. Progress is a beautiful story we tell ourselves, but some stories have shadows. In the rush toward newer, bigger, faster, cheaper, we tore down the fences that once kept us safe. We forgot the materials that endured. We forgot the lessons time tried to teach us. And in that forgetting, we built fragility into the walls around us. Today, I want to explore three ideas: Chesterton's fence, the Lindy Effect, and the concept of antifragility, and how they help reveal some uncomfortable things about the construction industry and about the environments we're creating for ourselves. Chesterton tells us a simple story. Two reformers walk along a road and come across an old fence. One says, "This looks pointless, let's tear it down." The other replies, "If you don't see the use of it, I won't let you remove it. Come back when you understand why it was put up, and then maybe we can talk." His point is so simple. If something exists, it existed for a reason. Tearing it down blindly can unleash consequences you never imagined. Traditional building was that fence. Methods like timber framing filled with wattle and daub, lime plasters, stone, and of course, rammed earth, they weren't random. They were the product of centuries of trial and error. Every generation learned what survived moisture, what didn't, what cracked, what lasted centuries, and what fell apart. We tore down the fence without ever learning why it stood for so long. This brings me to a concept from Nassim Taleb called the Lindy Effect. It says, for things that don't age, ideas, technologies, traditions, the longer they've survived, the longer they're likely to survive. Time acts as a kind of filter. It ruthlessly deletes what doesn't work and preserves what does. Traditional building methods are extraordinarily Lindy, not because the structures lasted forever, but because the knowledge, the techniques, the physics, the craftsmanship survived across centuries and across cultures. Timber framing, lime, earthen plasters, rammed earth. These weren't trends, they were practices refined over generations because they worked. They endured through fire, humidity, insects, storms, freeze-thaw, war, and entire civilizations rising and falling. And yes, the structures themselves often stood for hundreds of years. Not because they were immortal, but because the methods produced buildings that were inherently resilient, repairable, breathable, and made of materials that worked with nature instead of against it. As Taleb says, what time doesn't break, it makes stronger. Modern construction, by contrast, is not Lindy. Not the materials, not the techniques, not the assemblies, and not the underlying assumptions. Almost everything we use today is too new to have been tested by time. Spray foam is 40 years old. Plastic vapor barriers, a few decades. OSB, the 1960s. And endless smart membranes, tapes, foams, coatings, and adhesives, all younger than the average homeowner. We didn't just abandon the old structures, we abandoned the accumulated wisdom that made them work. We cut off a knowledge chain that had been refined for thousands of years in the name of progress. And here's the uncomfortable truth. All signs point to failure. The average North American house lasts 80 to 100 years, and many don't even reach that. A single human lifetime, a blink in architectural time. What we lost wasn't just stone and timber. We lost methods that created resilience. We replaced them with systems that fail if one tiny thing goes wrong. Taleb would call this fragility dressed up as innovation. Systems that look advanced until reality deviates from perfection. Another concept from Taleb that also fits perfectly into this conversation is antifragility. Fragile things break under stress. Robust things resist stress. But anti-fragile things actually grow stronger because of stress. Traditional building was anti-fragile. Lime plasters self-heal microcracks. Timber frames flex during storms. Earthen walls get harder with time and exposure. Porous assemblies absorb moisture and release it without damage. Buildings were allowed, even expected, to breathe. These materials partnered with nature instead of resisting it. Modern buildings, they are the opposite. They are fragile. We've layered complexity upon complexity until the entire system depends on near perfect human precision. A continuous airtight layer that must never be punctured. Vapor barriers that must be flawless. Adhesives that must not degrade. Tapes that must never peel. OSB that must never get wet. Spray foam that must never be uneven. HVACs that must always be perfectly calibrated. And all it takes is one mistake, one missed detail, one misplaced staple hole, one leak, one wall that settles half an inch, and the whole assembly can quietly start to rot. Taleb would call this naive interventionism, our belief that adding more fixes, more layers, more products somehow makes us safer, when in reality, it often makes us more vulnerable, because the system becomes too complicated to fail gracefully. And fragility has consequences. Modern construction isn't just fragile in its structure, it creates fragility in the people who live inside it. When the materials themselves break down easily, leak toxins easily, grow mold easily, or fail easily, that fragility doesn't stay confined to the walls. It becomes part of the air we breathe, the dust we inhale, the microbial soup we live in. Fragile buildings create fragile bodies because the boundaries between us and our homes are thinner than we like to admit. We've made our walls more airtight, but filled them with chemicals that off-gas into our living spaces. Isocyanates from spray foam, formaldehyde from pressed wood products, benzene, toluene, xylene from adhesives and caulks, phthalates from vinyl flooring, flame retardants like PBDEs and TCPP in insulation, styrene in foam boards and composites. And these aren't minor irritants. Most are known to be carcinogenic, neurotoxic, or endocrine disrupting. At the same time, our buildings are more prone to moisture damage than ever, which means mold, which means microbial VOCs, which means SVOCs released as materials degrade over time, which means PM 2.5, those ultrafine particulates that slip directly into your bloodstream. We inhale around 10,000 liters of air a day. Air is the single thing we consume most of in life. If that air is filled with mold toxins, VOCs, combustion byproducts, and ultrafine dust from decaying materials, we become fragile too. Brain fog, fatigue, system-wide inflammation, environmental illness, sick building syndrome, asthma in children. If the very place meant to shelter us slowly makes us sick, where does that leave us? And then there's the planet. Traditional buildings were made of earth, stone, timber, lime. When they eventually returned to the earth, they returned. They didn't pollute. But modern homes are filled with plastics, foams, and synthetic chemicals that don't return to the earth the way natural materials do. They break apart into microplastics, release flame retardants and solvents, leach toxins into the soil and water for generations to come. The fragility of these materials becomes ecological fragility, spreading outward long after the house itself is gone. And so the lesson here is simple: humility and a willingness to learn from time instead of always trying to outrun it. Chesterton's fence remind us to understand before we replace. The Lindy Effect reminds us that time is the best teacher. And anti-fragility reminds us to work with nature instead of against it. Our ancestors built homes that endured because they inherited building wisdom shaped by centuries, wisdom about moisture, air, heat, and time that lived in the craft itself. Their buildings breathed with the landscape and returned to it when their work was done. We have the ingenuity to do this again, to take ancient wisdom and apply it with modern tools, creating homes that nurture us instead of harm us. Our ancestors built homes that stood for centuries because they listened to nature's laws, the movement of moisture, the way materials breathe, and the patience of time. Those buildings aged with grace. Ours can too. We need to step away from a construction culture built on fragility and greed and choose a path rooted in care and respect. Today's video was a little more philosophical, and sometimes I'll go there, because pausing to consider the deeper why can help keep us grounded in what truly matters. Most of what I share on this channel is deeply rooted in ancestral wisdom, building science, practical tools, and clear solutions. For future videos, I'll be diving deeper into what standards like LEED do and what they don't do for our health and for the environment. I'll be exposing the North American construction industry in more detail and exploring solutions we can apply both in daily life and in building, because knowledge is power. And I truly believe that fixing our air is the last frontier of health. Learning to build in harmony with nature instead of wounding her at every turn is the only path to real progress. If you found this valuable, leave a comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.